There is some terrible, terrible, serious news, a milestone on global warming this week that we need to talk about. But there is also potentially a possible glimmer of sunshine. And I hate to use a weather-related metaphor there, but it's important, I think, for us to recognize where hope lies and what to do about it. But first, the terrible news. So The Guardian is reporting that there is a thaw in the Arctic permafrost, right? That's the subterranean frozen matter that you find beneath the landmass up in the Arctic, right? You don't necessarily have ice on the surface, but all the moisture, all the water below the surface has been frozen for literally thousands of years. Not anymore. Now, it's not all of it, but what they're saying is there are these outposts that they check in the Arctic. They actually did a flyover. These places are so remote that they don't even go out on foot. They just fly over. They were able to get a look at some of these places by plane, and it looked dramatically different from what it has for thousands of years, and dramatically different from what they were expecting for another 70 years. So in short, we've hit a milestone on the thaw of the Arctic permafrost 70 years earlier than scientists were expected. So now, instead of that hard, frozen, barren cap, they're seeing ponds, they're seeing vegetation. And this is not merely a symptom of climate change. This is part of a vicious cycle feedback loop that accelerates climate change. Why? Because the moisture frozen for thousands of years underneath the surface of the land, when it melts, it's not just the water that's turning into from solid into gas. All the gases, the atmospheric gases that were trapped in that permafrost when it froze, they're now being released into the atmosphere as well. And some of those are greenhouse gases, which means they themselves are not just symptomatic of climate change, they're contributing to climate change. So we're talking now, right now, I believe the estimate is that the oceans are rising at an estimated level of something like 3.3 millimeters every year. Actually, I'm confusing my stories here. Here's the other piece of bad news. The ice sheet in Greenland also melting unusually fast. And this is the estimate I was referring to. They're saying that that 40% of the Greenland ice sheet is now melting. 40%. Now, does that mean the entire 40% is going to be gone? No, but it means that area is experiencing melting. And this is not an all-time high, but it's one of 2 or 3 years that have all hit this level. And of course, it's all been in recent history. And the figure I was referring to earlier is that 1 millimeter of sea level rise this year alone is expected to be accounted for by Greenland alone. So just the Greenland melting that we're seeing right now will give us an extra 1 millimeter of sea level rise. And so I'm going to talk real quickly about the good news. And it starts off, because none of these things come unalloyed, right? It starts off terrible news. President Trump's nominee to be the next U.S. ambassador to the United Nations had her confirmation hearing before the Senate, before a Senate committee yesterday. And according to USA Today, this is, I don't even have her name in front of me, excuse me. Kelly Nightcraft, Kelly Nightcraft is the nominee to be the next U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. She is married to a coal CEO, and she is on the record as having made, I respect both sides of the science on climate change. Just horrific, horrifying, tragic stuff. However, in her hearing yesterday, and this is that glimmer of good news we're looking for, she said, quoting USA Today, "Human behavior has contributed to the changing climate, let there be no doubt. If confirmed, I will be an advocate in addressing climate change. I also understand that fossil fuels have played a part in climate change." Now, also happening this week is world governments are meeting in Bonn in Germany, working on trying to push forward to accelerate what goals the United Nations is going to seek in its climate negotiations. So the idea that someone who is at a minimum on record as being open to the human role in climate change and being an advocate for dealing with that in some substantive fashion, that's, I think, a potential glimmer of hope in terms of what the UN will actually be able to accomplish. And look, I understand that it's super easy and it's justifiable to say she's full of it, nothing's going to happen. But that lets us off the hook, right? Because I think it's important to, when we get these glimmers of hope, it's important to elevate them and amplify them so that the people responsible, Ms. Kraft in this case, they're rewarded, they're incentivized for saying the right thing, which I think in a logical world incentivizes people to do the right thing. If you say, I'm going to do good thing X and no one cares, the signal is, it doesn't matter if I do it one way or the other, because everyone's already baked into the cake that I'm not going to, so why bother? So I want to share one more quote before I open this up for questions. The Guardian, and here's to the Guardian, quotes the executive director of Greenpeace International, a woman named Jennifer Morgan, talking about the Arctic permafrost thaw. She says, quoting again, "Thawing permafrost is one of the tipping points for climate breakdown, and it's happening before our very eyes." I want to get back to that. She says, quote, "This premature thawing is another clear signal that we must decarbonize our economies, and immediately." So 2 quick points. One is that media have fallen down on the job for decades when covering climate change. And it's not because they get money from big oil or whatever, or at least to my knowledge, in my experience in the media, it's not. It's because it's hard to cover climate change. News, when we watch it, is usually defined by, is there a peg? Is there a concrete new thing that happened today? Climate change is a very slow-moving phenomenon. Has been. Not anymore. Right now, we've got Arctic permafrost at coming in 70 years early with the thaw. We've got the Greenland ice sheet melting at record, if not record, then all-time highs. So we've got pegs all over the place, and we need to reward and incentivize media to pay attention now that those pegs are here. And the other thing I wanted to say about what Jennifer Morgan said is, this premature thawing is another clear signal that we must decarbonize our economies. I don't know exactly, I'm not here to advocate for one position or another in terms of whether life sentences for anyone who takes a barrel of oil out of the ground. But I do think that future generations are going to look back and say, when you saw that this was happening, why didn't you stop it immediately? If an alien race or a terrorist group had spent decades pumping destructive, destabilizing gases into the atmosphere with the result of widespread disease and migration and destruction of property, no one would blink an eye and say, no, you can't do that. So I don't know what the rationale is for saying, well, we'll continue this for a while and hopefully eventually we'll sort of taper off. But future generations are going to look at that and say, were you insane or were you just evil? And I don't think it's either of those exactly, but they're not wrong for asking us that question. All right. Thanks for letting me rant on climate change, which I just don't think it gets enough attention. And that's frankly on us, meaning all of us as well. DLJ says, oh, well, it was nice knowing you all. That's the kind of hope and optimism I'm trying to inspire. Mr. Elder informs me that he never misses any. Thank you. Let's see. The only good thing about climate change is it will bring us all closer together because of rising oceans. That's hilarious / horrible. The rich and powerful think they will get out of climate change by trying to run off to Mars. Well, I mean, they're not wrong, right? I mean, we've seen already, that comment was from Mr. Elder. We've seen already, we're seeing it right now, that the people with the least are the most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. They're the most vulnerable to the spread of new diseases. They're the most vulnerable to wildfires brought on by drought. They're most vulnerable to rising sea levels, right? It's not that none of these things will affect rich people. Rich people have houses in the California hills. Rich people have houses on the Florida coast. They can move. They can shift to one of their other homes a lot more easily than poor people can who live in similar environments. So whether it's Mars or somewhere else, yeah, the rich people are going to get out of it. Climate change. Do you think that the UN should have said something to the U.S.? Alma says. I'm not sure what you mean about that, but they have said. That's from Alma. Says, do I think that the UN should have said something to the U.S.? I think they say something to the U.S. all the time. I think the real issue is, are we listening and are we doing anything about it? I mean, they issued that report last year saying that we've got until the year 2030 before, if we don't change anything, before the sort of catastrophic future brought about by climate change becomes irreversible. And then, if we haven't done anything concrete and material sufficient by 2030, then it's just a matter of managing the catastrophe, the rolling catastrophe that we're going to see for generations. Sarah Matthews says, government never thinks about our own extinction, especially when being run by profit motive. That's from Sarah Matthews. So I have some thought on that. I do think, Sarah, that it's not crazy to think that there's profit motive here, but I also think that I tend to think that there are very few members of Congress or politicians generally who authentically believe that climate change is a real man-made threat, but they're going to get money from it, so to hell with it. I tend to think more that if someone could post in the comments, there's a phrase about it's very tough to get a man to change his mind when his paycheck depends on not doing so, which is a different form of corruption, but it's also a different. It tells us that we have to deal with the people in charge in a different way. And I do also think that part of the problem here is that our founding fathers, the founding fathers of this country, they weren't thinking about natural threats from the natural world that would play out over decades, right? And so they didn't have to construct a political system that would be responsive to long-term but incremental, gradual threats. So we've got the time frames for our federal government, right, are 2 years for House of Representatives, 4 years for the executive branch or presidency, 6 years for the Senate, and forever for the Supreme Court, right? If it were 20 years or something, and someone were up for re-election next year who had a 20-year history of ignoring climate change and all of that, then I think and we had to elect them to be in office from the year 2020 through the year 2040, maybe those dynamics would have changed a little bit. I don't know, and I'm not suggesting that we have to blow up the Constitution in order to do this, but I do think that the fact that the structure, the way the government and our politics are structured around those biennial benchmarks, places a burden on us, right? The people who do the voting, the campaigning, the organizing, places a burden on us to change how we approach these things and be more aggressive, be more active, be eternally vigilant, right? So I think we, as if we want to talk about people who organize around this issue, I think that's that incremental nature has yet to sort of be baked into how we, the people demanding change, go about demanding it as well. Let's see if there's anything else, and then I'll stop talking. DLJ says it's not new diseases we need to worry about. It's millennium-old viruses that might be defrosted and released. So DLJ, I think I'm certainly not going to dispute that. I'm not a scientist, but I just want to clarify. I wasn't referring to new diseases. What I'm referring to is the idea that diseases that have historically, traditionally been isolated and dealt with in specific areas, as the weather changes, you're going to get animals moving where they haven't moved before. You're going to get insects, mosquitoes moving where they have not moved before. and they're going to be taking those diseases into populations, human and otherwise, that have never been exposed to them and that are potentially uniquely vulnerable, not prepared to deal with them on a systemic level, whether it's the World Health Organization or whatever. I mean, I shouldn't say not prepared, because I've read some articles about just how amazingly well prepared CDC and WHO can be when properly funded. They do amazing work. But the point is, those resources, those response systems, are going to get taxed in a way that we haven't seen before. Okay. Mr. Elder says, that is why the Founding Fathers designed it, so we could have political revolutions, and they designed the Constitution so we could change it to meet the times. I'm going to close this out for today by saying, yeah, you're absolutely right. And with that, I'll wish you guys a good day. And I'll remind you again, if you haven't already, I hope you'll subscribe to TYTI Daily, our YouTube channel here, and also follow us and like us on Facebook. We're going to have Ken Klippenstein doing more of these, especially in the next few weeks. He's our senior investigative reporter. He's also famous on Twitter. So if you're a fan of Ken's, you should definitely subscribe and follow us, because you'll be seeing more from him over the next few weeks. And tomorrow, I'll be back talking about media, both TYT Investigates specifically, TYT and the media more broadly. I try to do that every Friday, answer questions about the media, drawing on my work here at TYT Investigates and my own past, having worked in cable news, broadcast news, and in print. So I hope you'll join me tomorrow, and have a good day in the meantime. Thanks, guys. Bye.